set? Hello, and welcome to Indiana Issues, the public affairs program that goes beyond the headlines and sound bites and brings you about Indiana's news issues in their entirety. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Today on the program, we'll be talking about school safety, also summer study committees, and Roseanne canceled. What does that have to do with Indiana politics? Well, you'd be somewhat pleasantly surprised, or maybe not. Our panel here today, our cast of characters, includes Libertarian Mark Rutherford, also
Hello.
Democrat Kip Tu. Our good friend and news analyst, writes for Annapolis Monthly and Political, Adam Wren. Adam, thank you for joining the family today.
Be here, thank you.
And no stranger to this program, just fresh from the golf course, our good friend, State Senator Jim Merritt. But the nice thing about this, folks, we're always casual around here. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and start. Obviously, Jim, I want to start with you with the big issue that we've been dealing with since Memorial Day weekend, school safety, the shooting at Noblesville West Middle School. Luckily, no fatalities, but 2 people injured, a young man in custody has sort of re-brought the issue of school safety back to the forefront of Indiana. We'll start with you.
You know, it's interesting. Last night at Kenny Chesney, I wasn't there, but I heard on the radio today that he led everybody yelling at Ella Whistler, "We love you." And communities grow together, and hopefully Noblesville is much more of a in-tune community before or after this crisis, this tragedy, this horror. And we have to redouble our efforts to make our schools safe. And if you're going to get wanded at Jimmy Buffett, I think kids, when you say goodbye to kids on the school bus or if they're leaving for school, you expect to see them come back. And we have to continually work. I was at the HSC High School, Hamilton Southeastern High School, Safe City, Safe School event the other night. 800 people, and summer now, attended, and they're all interested, and they all want input. And I've gotten plenty of email from folks, and I'll be working on a gun safety bill with several folks in the legislature, and I think we need to really think very seriously about. Yeah, I know there's a lot of factors, but having metal detectors in schools and when they get off the school bus, I really think that we need to try some new measures and be innovative with different ways that don't cost money either.
Adam, obviously you write about a lot of issues of school safety, not just an issue here in Indiana, but across the country. But it's just 30 minutes up the street. It really hits close to home.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard the sirens from my house going to the school that Friday morning for sure. What's interesting to me is that the shooting has already receded from the national consciousness in Noblesville. There are different circumstances here in this particular case, and there was a hero teacher, and a lot of the narrative has been focused on the teacher. And it'll be interesting to see how long of a shelf life this shooting has in terms of our conversation and state level talks about what we'll do regarding this incident and how we'll respond to it. There's a summer study committee looking at the number of career counselors in high schools, but I wonder, if there will be some conversation about, school psychologists. Right now, I don't think that there's a minimum number other than one that a school corporation needs to have. So it'll be interesting to see whether, even looking at the ratio of guidance counselors in high schools will be something that is talked about.
Kip, is that a concern? Because it seems the pattern of the narrative of school shootings, at least in the last few years, has been the shooting happens, we all get outraged, we get mad, and then just like Adam said, they tend to fade away, from the headlines until the next school shooting.
Well, obviously in each community it does not fade, and I don't think it's going to be fading from the Noblesville community's psyche very, very soon. And I think it obviously has affected Senator Merritt. I mean, he's close to that. I don't know if you have any of the Noblesville area in your district or not.
I border it.
But you hear him now talking about gun safety. So I think that's a sea change for
this
for
ain't
some
fading
folks.
away. It ain't
For
fading
some
away.
folks. And I guess what I would say with respect to it is I have a couple thoughts. Number one, the National Rifle Association needs to come to the table at some point, or we need to just ignore them. And one of the things that you can do, I think, short of talking about gun control or taking them on, is look at strict liability for parents of parents who own guns. So if their children are involved in a school shooting, they are strictly liable. That's something certainly the legislature could do, something the national legislature could do, short of talking about guns themselves. Who's liable?
And
that
got the most applause the other night from 800 people.
That might change some behavior. It's not going to change all behavior. I think I just saw a study come out the other day that since Columbine, this behavior has become, the wrong word is normalization, but has become so prevalent in our society that there are certain kids that just latch on to it, and there has to be more study about how that is done. And of course, I come from the liberal side of the aisle. I really believe that there ought to be a lot more gun control legislation out there. I don't know that in the current environment we can have that, but it seems to me that a vast majority of Americans are where I am. We ought to have background checks. We ought to have magazine type of regulation. We ought to do a lot more than what we are doing. It won't eliminate a lot of it, and it certainly doesn't even address what's happening in urban America outside of school shootings. What's happening in Indianapolis, the murder rate in Indianapolis is largely because people's easy access to weapons. And
Mark, let me ask you, because Skip brought up a couple things, particularly the legal sort of legislative side. If I want to say in Indiana, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, there's something in the statute already that sort of limits the liability of gun manufacturers in instances such as we saw at Noblesville. But is it time to look at, like Kip said, the liability on the part of the parent, particularly in these sort of minor type situations, that if it can show that the gun can be traced,
the person's a minor, it's not a minor.
The person's a minor, not, that if it can't be traced back, we hold minors accountable if they do damage with the car, if you break a neighbor's window. Is it time to maybe look at that, holding parents accountable from a legal perspective if their kids,
I'm not so sure that the legal perspective does anything any good. It's a reaction that people have about it. And the problem with strict liability is you have parents who are trying to help a kid and they don't do it because they can't. They've done everything they can. And now are they liable for it? If they have a kid with a problem, is the answer just jettison them out of the home, abandon them, do it, find a lawyer so they do it in a legal way? I mean, I don't think that's the way, the approach that should be done on this. What I would like to point out is that it's a cultural problem. I think the news media in Indiana did an excellent job in reporting on this because of the focus. As has already been mentioned, it was about the hero teacher. The focus is also on the poor student who was shot. That's where it is. A lot of the times with people who have problems, the motivation is they want to be infamous is better than not being known at all, is what I've read about a lot of things out there. So that helps right there. The other thing is the schools are too big. I went to a small college. I went to Carmel High School. I see what it is and the difference in. I could get away with anything at Carmel High School. Not that I tried. I didn't want to. But I saw students who did all types of things. At Wabash College, my God, the professors knew that I was doing something wrong before I even did it, okay? So I think that we need to take a look at the size of our schools and should we be going into a deconsolidation. I'm not sure consolidation, although it did save some money, it has some problems. Maybe we need to be spending the money on smaller school systems where it's easier to see a person who's beginning to have problems. It won't catch everything. That's impossible. But it's something that we should be starting to think of outside-the-box solutions that haven't been dealt with in a long time.
Let me ask you, gentlemen, this. And first, I have to go right ahead real quick.
Yeah, to your point about the media coverage, I agree that the local media has done a great job covering this. But part of the reason why the coverage has taken that arc is because of the prosecutor has not released the name of that student, and won't do so until there's a decision made about whether or not he'll be tried as an adult.
Right, I'd be surprised if the media doesn't know, and in other areas they start broadcasting it. The prosecutor has not handicaps, but can't because it's a juvenile. But media, because they're good, they probably know who it is. Because they're good here, they haven't released it and they haven't made it a big deal. I'm really happy about that.
Let me ask you, gentlemen, this. I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine from a weekend radio show. He's an urban educator, used to teach in IPS schools, now teaches up in Chicago. And he sort of lamented, just sort of ironically that, for years, urban school districts have been looking at suburban school districts on how to improve test scores and improve academic performance. Now it seems that suburban school districts are going to be looking at urban schools on how to address the issues of school safety, because they've had metal detectors and wands, going on 20, 30 years in some cases, and you've never heard about a school shooting actually really in an urban school setting. Maybe outside the school is one thing, but not necessarily inside it. Is that something, Jim, as you guys go forward, you're going to look at is, what if school districts like Indianapolis Public Schools, Warren Township, Fort Wayne, maybe to a lesser degree South Bend and the Lake County area have done to keep schools safe inside the school?
Yeah, the irony. It's a good point, Abdul. But I think just getting back to a little bit of liability at the holding a parent responsible, I think that sounds really good. But Indiana, other than a DCS situation, there are no storage, there are no gun safety laws. The NRA.
Gee, why is that?
You cold assault, gentlemen. But the NRA has protocols of safety and the like. But I think this is going to NRA is going to have to come to the table, and we are going to have to talk about gun safety. And if we do have gun safety, that's when you have to. That's when you can talk about holding a parent liable or responsible. But yes, to answer your question, I think you will see a lot of different new ideas going into suburban schools that probably are already being accomplished in urban schools.
You are watching Indiana Issues Online, the public affairs program where we go beyond the headlines and sound bites to try to bring you Indiana's issues in their entirety. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz. Our guests today are Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Kip Tu, political analyst Adam Wren, and State Senator Jim Merritt, Republican. Gentlemen, want to change gears and now go to those wonderful, it's summertime, so it means it's time for those summer study committees, all sorts of fun issues that are out there. And let's go ahead and start with the issue of my personal favorite, medical marijuana. We'll get to alcohol just a.
And you're not going to talk about bias crimes?
Obviously, my paycheck, that's a bias crime. So there you go. And the sad thing is, I'm my own employer. That's the sad part. Adam, let me start with you. Do you think
be
we'll
here
see,
all week?
Yeah, Exactly. Actually, yeah. Adam, do you think we'll see any real movement on medical marijuana here in Indiana?
With the opioid crisis, I think it's something that other state legislatures are looking at. In Ohio, for example, it's a conversation that maybe 10 years ago wouldn't have happened, but people dealing with chronic pain, we're seeing a move towards medical marijuana. Looking at our legislature and our context here in Indiana, I think it's hard to say what will happen.
Mark, let me jump over to you
Sure.
On the marijuana issue.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen eventually. The question is, when's the appropriate time? The legislature has to deal with that when they think the constituents demand it. The more I see, my goodness, the veterans are getting, from the United States military services are now getting organized about medical marijuana. When you start seeing that, you're going to have the pressure to at least have medical marijuana. I think it will happen. I don't know if it will happen after the study commission now. Study commissions, I think, are good. There's many reasons for them. But at least you get a public discussion, and the legislators get an idea of, are people ready for this? And I think they are.
Jim, you've done a lot of work in the heroin opioid abuse. So always interested in your perspective, on this issue of marijuana for people, for a lot of folks. Even though a lot of people support legalization, there's still a significant portion of folks who think it's a gateway drug. And with all the, like I said, heroin and opioid issues, they want to add sort of another thing to the mix. Help us out here from your perspective.
Well, I think it's a gateway drug. I think that it will happen, but I think it has to happen with all 50 states. I think the federal government, it's been said that marijuana is an incredible plant that could solve and save people's lives. And I just hope that at some point the federal government looks at marijuana and the positive effects of it and makes it legal medically for all 50 states. We're probably a decade away from it in Indiana. I don't know if we'll ever see it on the social side of it, but I'm glad we're studying it. That's what study committees are actually for, is to allow transparency and allow people to have their opinions. I don't get any email from my 130,000 constituents about it whatsoever.
Kip, did you ever think we lived to the day that the Indiana legislature of all people would be studying marijuana for medicinal purposes?
Yeah, and I think they're behind time on it. We have several states that already have legalize marijuana, not medical, actually legalize it. And those laboratories of democracy that we like to call are doing pretty well. Colorado, California,
and Washington State, my personal favorite.
Oregon.
Well, Michigan, Illinois, I think also.
Well, those are medical marijuana states. I'm talking about fully legal states. And so I think that the Indiana legislature ought to ask those folks how things are going. I mean, I think we can read newspapers and read the journals and see what's happening. I want to take issue with Senator Merritt. I know it's not a surprise to him. I take issues with him.
You always do this.
But I don't believe it's a gateway drug. I don't think the science says it's a gateway drug. If you have an addictive issue in yourself, then it may entice you. But I think for most people, it's not an addictive situation, and it's not a gateway to anything else. And there's a lot of people in Indiana who use marijuana on a daily or weekly basis, doing it illegally, who don't turn to heroin or don't turn to any of the other opioids that are out there. And so while we have to always be mindful of folks that have addictive issues, we need to help them on the other end and not deny citizens of Indiana the opportunity to have recreational marijuana or medical marijuana if they want it. It is not a dangerous drug. Alcohol is much more dangerous than marijuana.
And it's funny you bring up alcohol because it's a perfect segue to my next one.
I knew that's where we were going.
Now, the other issues that Indiana lawmakers will be studying will be, of course, Indiana's alcohol laws. One of the big things that didn't quite make it through last session was the issue of cold beer sales at liquor stores. Cold beer sales at grocery and convenience stores. The folks at the Petroleum Marketers Association, the gas station convenience people, came out recently with a cold beer bag. You fill the bag with ice, throw your beer, and it's cold in 15 minutes. Is cold beer not going to happen?
Well, 9-1, a defeat in that committee. I can't see it happening anytime soon. I'm all for the bags. I think I love creativity and innovation. You won't see me voting against that. But
as long as I can fill my beer bag with marijuana, then
an idea that goes back to the 1900s is actually creative, right? I mean, ice boxes.
That's wonderful. That's great. But no, I don't think you're going to see cold beer next year. Representative Davis, who you'd like to talk about, former Representative Davis is the new chairman, and he's a solid individual, and hopefully he'll keep the openness that Senator Gard had. Because I think that commission did a really good job last year.
Let's throw up a picture of Representative Bill Davis so people can see exactly who we're talking about. There had been some concern, Chris, that because Representative Davis, not Chris, but Kip, that Representative Davis, former rep, who has not been a big fan of alcohol expansion in the past, that might sort of maybe guide the summer study committee in a way that cold beer sales and maybe some of the loosening of Indiana's alcohol laws might not happen. Like I said, you're in it. Full disclosure, you lobby for one of the industries involved in this.
Yep.
Can Bill Davis be a fair chairman?
Yeah. Well, look, I think we didn't feel like Bev was a fair chairman. We still got the outcome that we wanted. Summer study committees is historically help set policy. They don't set policy. The legislature then takes whatever happens in the summer study committee, and then they deal with it as a legislature. So. A lot of summer talk about who the summer study committee chairman is going to be, but at the end of the day, what matters is who's going to be on the two public policy committees on either the House and the Senate, and then the decisions that they're going to make, and that's how we lobbyists approach the issue. We worry much more about who's on those committees, and we have our grassroots networks reach out to those folks, and that's where the ball game is. It's not whether or not Bill Davis is going to be the committee chair for the summer study committee. Who, he's in the past been more friendly to our side of the issue, but that doesn't mean very much, really.
Adam, I always sort of jokingly tell people that when we have the debates about Sunday retail sales and cold beer at a grocery store, convenience store, that's really just sort of the tip of the iceberg. The real fight is going to be when we look at who gets to distribute what, who the permitting system. I call those the broccoli and the Brussels sprouts of the alcohol laws, but that's where the rubber is going to hit the road. What do you see happening in that neck of the woods?
Well, what's interesting to me is I went and bought a beer historically to participate in the historic nature of Sunday sales on the first Sunday. But it's interesting. I haven't had the urge to buy a beer ever since then on a Sunday.
On any other
Sunday? No, just on a Sunday. So it's interesting how quickly that human impulse goes away after something is not prohibited anymore. I don't know. It'll be interesting to watch. It's hard to say, I think.
Well, Abdul, the sex appeal's gone. The shiny object's gone. You're talking about distribution and issues that the people out in Indiana just don't care about. It's there's just nothing to it for them, and so it'll be a kind of a dull commission hearing season this year for that.
And I hope part of what the study committee looks into is the recent study that I tweeted out a couple of days ago.
We didn't catch that.
CNN did a story. There's a pretty comprehensive study about easier access to alcohol actually leads to more DUIs and more those kinds of incidents. So
and guess what?
Let me finish my point.
No, but if you turn off the light, it leads to dark.
Yes,
Obviously.
Right. But the point of the matter is, the overarching issue here is alcohol should be treated differently than furniture, should be treated differently than a car, because it is, by its very nature, something that ought to be more regulated. And so that's why the debate has always been so pointed. And then you put in with that the economic incentives of all of those and the historical businesses that have built up under there. And it's not as easy as you want to make it for the consumer, because there are a lot of folks who have invested money, who have paid a lot of money for their permits. And you know these issues. But I'm saying it is not just as easy as going out and buying a chair. As far as how you regulate the industry.
Well, you know me. I don't like regulation. I'm not so sure alcohol needs to be as regulated as heavily as it is. But it is, if you understand the history of why we are where we're at. But I'm seeing a lot of legislative fatigue. If you look at last session, my goodness, there was a huge jump in what I consider modernization of alcohol laws in Indiana. A lot of legislators are going to say, let's take a break. Let's just go to something else.
Let's have a beer and just let
Let's go have a beer. Exactly. So I don't think much will happen for that reason. And maybe it'll come up again sometime in the next couple of sessions where this will become an issue that may be viable. But I can see a lot of legislators going, hey, why are you complaining? We made huge headway last year. Let's work on something else.
One of the other big things, too, gentlemen, that Indiana lawmakers will be looking at is the issue of sports betting. We had the Supreme Court the past 30 days or so. Sorry, that's my phone. I don't know why people are calling me. Like I said, hey, we're doing a broadcast.
I don't know why anybody calls you either.
Kip!
My wife, except my wife being number one and all that.
Adam, I think you add a little class to this place.
That's why he's a new guy. The issue of sports betting. The U.S. Supreme Court said the federal government cannot do an outright ban on sports betting. They can regulate it, but not prohibit it. Turn it over to the 50 states. Already there's legislation. Once State Representative Alice Morrison from Terre Haute, Allen's going to introduce legislation that would allow for sports betting. Ron Alting on the Senate Public Policy Committee said, hey, I'll give it a hearing.
Did you call him Alice Morrison?
He did. He's a big guy. Looks like Bosma.
I've been watching some 70s music lately. So let me ask you, Adam, we'll start with you. Will we see betting on Colts and Pacer games?
I think we will. And I also think that, for a long time, it's been the joke that soccer is the sport of America's future. Sports betting might make it the sport of America's present. I think, the World Cup is happening this month.
People bet on that stuff?
Oh, people bet on everything. People bet on everything. So, I do think we'll see sports betting in Indiana.
Jim, one of the things that the counter arguments to the sports betting thing has been is that people worry that if you allow for sports betting, how do you tax it? Who gets a cut? Of the winnings? Do we walk in a situation where the Black Sox scandal of 100 years ago, 1919, where players start throwing games because of they know there's money riding on it? If Indiana does decide to do it, how much regulation is going to be needed in this area?
Well, I think first of all, I'm waiting for the casino in Terre Haute, because I thought there was going to be one. No, there was legislation Senator Ford had last year to use all the different facilities and move them all to Terre Haute. But I agree with Adam. I think it's on the way. But I think the devil, like most important earth-moving legislation, be it road funding or anything that's dealing with money, the devil is in the details. And what other states are doing with taxing, and so I was around when we legalized the lottery and riverboats, and so. And this has come slowly, but more likely in the near future, probably not next session, but we'll get very familiar with it. Probably have a big study commission for the next couple of years in 19 and 20, and find out about it, because I don't know enough about this. as a legislator, make an informed decision. So I think there are probably 149 other people that are in that situation.
Kip, there's always been that argument about if you allow for sports betting, as you know, some of our friends in the State House have any problem with anything they would consider expanding, the expansion of gambling. Would this be an expansion of gambling?
No, it'd be a legalization of what's going on right now.
Yes.
It just legalize what is already happening. A couple of points here. I think that when we do get to the details, if you will, about that, there's going to be a huge fight between the casino organizations and the leagues. The leagues now know there's a lot of money they might be able to make, and so they're asking for an integrity fee. And in lots of jurisdictions across the country, never had one before. Sports betting is legal in some states; they've not gotten this integrity fee. So once again, the legislature is going to be going to have to pick.
We're going to be
between.
in the middle.
They're going to be in the middle. They're going to have to pick between the casinos and
we don't like
the leagues.
picking winners.
and so that's where I think you will see the fight at the legislature comes down to. And the consumer themselves, in the end, there's already sports betting. They're already doing it. They've been doing it forever. DraftKings and those guys have legalized it already, although they say that's a game of skill. It's not that skillful.
Yeah. Are we opening the door, Mark, to expansion of gaming?
That's going to take a while. It's like medical marijuana. It's everything. Indiana, for better or for worse, sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, takes its time in the legislature to make major policy decisions. There's going to be a lot, as Kip says, there's going to be a lot of interest fighting about what to do. And one thing that I'm connected to still is my families came from southern Indiana, and our family reunions were sometimes divided into pro-betting and anti-betting, anti-gambling. My family was in the pro-gambling one because we like
Which
racehorses.
one should I bet on?
You should bet on the racehorses, Churchill Downs.
No, I mean your family.
My family. Yeah, I don't know. But my point with that is just that it's still a contentious issue if my family still, talks about it, and some say gambling's horrible, and others say we love to do it. It's fun to put $2 on a horse or $2 on a baseball team, whether they win or not. It's still out there, and that influences legislators a lot.
Well, my aunt used to always complain about gambling as she was on her way to church bingo. So I just always thought that was rather fascinating perspective on things. Gentlemen, our last topic real quick before we get ready to wind down here. Like I said, normally we try to focus on Indiana issues, but it's something everybody's been talking about, the issue of Roseanne Barr program being canceled due to a tweet she made about Valerie Jarrett, former assistant to President Barack Obama, basically calling her a cross between the Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes. I don't know why you would say that, and so I guess a side effect of Ambien is not only sleep but also racism. But then you have people on the right saying, well, this star called Donald Trump's person this person called this person this. Why aren't they being fired? Is this proof, Kip, that we are now in a universe of 3% unemployment and everybody's got a job because this is what everybody's talking about?
Well, actually, I'm disappointed. I understand the desire to talk about this sideshow, if you will, but the fact of the matter was the same day it was revealed that we lost over 5,000 people in Puerto Rico during the last hurricane, and that got almost no press, but Roseanne got 12 hours on CNN or something incredible like that. And, that's a disappointing thing that we're obsessing about this kind of stuff. Look, ABC made the decision they needed to make, which was to fire her. They don't want racists on their evening TV programs. She can claim she's not a racist, but when you equate a black person with an ape, you have kind of defined who you are as a person, and so that's the way that goes.
Adam, you write about a lot of national issues. What have you been seeing on the national scene about all this?
Abdul, I'm a writer, and by nature, one of the writers who got me interested into the craft was reading Mark Twain as a kid. Mark Twain had a lot of social and political satire and commentary, and I think the Trump era is missing its Mark Twain. You look at what happened with Samantha Bee this week making vulgar comments about Ivanka Trump, and then you had the Roseanne instance on the other side. We're really sort of missing a national humorist who can bring us together while making us thinking deeper about culture.
So you tell me I got to go get another job now.
That's right, yeah.
What you're saying. That's what I thought.
That's right, yeah.
All right, gentlemen, we always close out the show with a quick look in what I call the political ether. What's ahead? What should Hoosiers be paying attention to? Jim, we'll start with you.
Well, first of all, the only thing I have to say is Darryl Poe is retiring. Who is Darryl Poe? He owned Educated Sandwich, which most of us have eaten lunch there, and the soups are fabulous. And he's retiring today, and I gave him a little a little honored, saying he's a big deal, and he's the soup master of the century. And we will miss Darrell Poe, and hopefully the Educate sandwich can continue the supremacy that they've had.
Been working on this all day.
Yeah.
Adam?
There's some talk about whether Trump is fully committed to defending and being part of the midterm races over the next few months. He's expected to come back to Indiana, but just this week he, there's questions about whether or not he's fully engaged in the Indiana Senate race or others. He's invited Heidi Heitkamp to bill signings, the Democratic senator from North Dakota, as well as Joe Donnelly, and so it'll be interesting to see the tension between Senate Republicans and their campaign, and whether Trump is fully on board in the 2018 midterm race.
Yep.
I think the trade war is something that's not on the top of minds of a lot of folks, but it's going to be just what happened yesterday, for example. Picking on Canada is just absurd in every way I can imagine, but it's what the president thought of to do when he woke up in the morning. So that's what we're going to be debating, and it has real consequences for the Indiana economy, and it also has real consequences for Republicans on the ballot. In some places, you saw Jackie Walorski criticize it. You saw other Republicans criticize it. Who knows? It may be it may disappear, because you can never know whether he's going to follow anything through. But if he does follow through with this, and we do have retaliation from the EU, and we do have retaliation from Canada, that's going to negatively impact the Indiana economy, and it will redound to politicians to try to figure out what to do about it.
Mark?
Yeah, I think school safety is a big, big issue, and it's a big issue with family. And I'm seeing a lot of smoke out there, which is that should we be considering homeschooling or small charter schools? What I don't know is whether that's a reaction to everything that's going on or whether it's an actual fire. But I think the months to tell, we're going to begin to get an idea about that.
Good point.
My thing to look out for next week when Republicans meet for their state convention in Evansville, even though they have no contested races, they just put out their platform. There's some language that some folks on the far ideological right may not be happy with when it comes to families and the whole, what they look like. And there could be a possible floor fight. People want to go back to language in 2014, back to the days of RFRA and HJR 3. Just my thing to look out for. So just a little FYI. Our guests today have been Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Kip 2, analyst Adam Wren, Republican State Senator Jim Merritt. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz. Thanks to all the folks at Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis for hosting us today. You've been watching Indiana Issues, the online version, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for being with us.